There's another technology wave taking place, and it's a digital transformation of capital. It's digital capital. It's happening right in front of people's faces, but because it's unexpected and it's a paradigm shift and it's an inversion of everyone's worldview, they tend to dismiss it as something random, unlikely, unlucky, scary. Bitcoin's the solution to the problem. It's the solution to the economic problem. How do you win when there's only 7 companies that can win? And it's a solution to the technology question. How do you get on the next technology wave? And how do you exploit it to the benefit of your investors, your family, your company, your customers? Now, how do I know Bitcoin is the next wave? Why should you think it's the next wave? Well,
Michael Saylor, co-founder and executive chairman of MicroStrategy, highlights Bitcoin's explosive growth, positioning it as a financial revolution. Bitcoin is now the 7th largest asset, outpacing giants like Microsoft, with an annualized return of 147% since 2011. Saylor believes Bitcoin offers unmatched speed, efficiency, and accessibility, representing the next wave of technology. It's transforming finance in ways most people don't fully grasp. Stick around for Saylor's insights on Bitcoin's future, and don't forget to check out my free 5-minute crypto newsletter for expert predictions and breaking news.
Now, how do I know Bitcoin is the next wave? Why should you think it's the next wave? Well, here's a chart of the top 10 largest assets in the world right now. And so if you look at the 10, Bitcoin's number 7. It is the 7th largest asset in the world. Gold's number 1. Then you've got these magnificent 7 companies: NVIDIA, Apple, Microsoft, Amazon, Alphabet, Meta. And you got Saudi Aramco. And you got a little bit of silver. But of them, the fastest growing of these is Bitcoin. Bitcoin is growing 3 times faster than Microsoft. Why is it the next wave? Well, it's not just the fastest growing asset in the world. It's the most popular asset in the world. It's literally the most popular asset in the world. Everyone wants to talk about it. It's the most interesting. It's the most digital asset in the world, right? You can't digitally transform, you can't move these other assets at the speed of light 1,000,000 times a second between 8 billion computers the way you can with Bitcoin. It's the most useful asset in the world. If you need $1 billion in 5 minutes on a Saturday afternoon, this is the only asset you can liquidate, right? It is useful to every company on earth, to every person on earth. It is global. You know, these other things aren't global assets, with the exception of gold. So, in essence, Bitcoin is the digital gold, but you know, you can't beam gold between 8 billion iPhones, and gold's a 5,000-year-old idea, and Bitcoin is that idea reinvented for the 21st century. And now I'm going to give you a set of suggestions or a set of indicators as to why maybe this is something big, why it's not just random. This is Bitcoin versus that asset allocation chart, and you can see that it looks hard to find a solution when you don't include Bitcoin, and when you put Bitcoin on the chart, it renders every other solution irrelevant. It's like it's pretty clear there's one thing that's interesting and everything else is just more of the same. Bitcoin punches a hole into the chart. 60% over the past 4 years. And if we zoom into that a little bit closer, this is asset performance since MicroStrategy adopted the Bitcoin standard. The S&P's returning 13% a year. Real estate's 10% a year. Gold's 7% a year. Bonds are minus 5% a year. As you can see, the cost of capital, the hurdle rate there is 13. The only thing that's beating it that's conventional is the Magnificent 7, which is a bit more than doubling it. And then Bitcoin is doubling the Magnificent 7. So one of these things is really an overwhelming winner. Bitcoin more than 4 times conventional performance. Let's look out over 14 years. It's the winner in 11 of 14 years. So it's not just it's up over the last 4 years, it's up more over 10 years, 8 years, 12 years. Here's another slice. You can look at everything in the world trying to find something which is more compelling, but Bitcoin is showing an annualized performance of 147% from 2011. But again, after Bitcoin, you just fall to like your best growth stock idea. And it's not just that it's the best performing asset, it's the best performing uncorrelated asset. It's got the highest Sharpe ratio. It's also got the lowest correlation. These are fidelity numbers. So the entire world is looking for an investment idea that's uncorrelated to risk assets. We have entire conferences, alternative investment conferences, and we talk about, should it be real estate? Should it be natural gas rights? Should it be intellectual property? Well, Bitcoin is the global, fungible, liquid alternative asset. And you don't have to believe me, or you don't have to understand the fundamentals. Even if you don't want to spend 1,000 hours studying it, you can just look at the chart published by Fidelity. It gives you the same answer. BlackRock, they launched a Bitcoin ETF a year ago. That ETF leaped above 1,100 ETFs that they sell to be number 13 in 12 months. So that just shows you how fast it's moving, blowing past 1,000 other ETFs. But it's more than that. That ETF is the most successful ETF launch in the history of ETFs. And I would say if you look at Wall Street over 40 years, the last big innovation in Wall Street was the ETF. The idea that you could buy SPY, or you could buy a portfolio, a QQQ, or a diversified portfolio of assets. That was the big idea, big enough to attract trillions of dollars of capital. And the most successful example of that big idea is IBIT, right? Which has just been a screaming home run. Not only is it run past nearly all of the BlackRock ETFs and all the other ETFs, it's actually outstripped BlackRock's gold fund, which is around forever, IAU, and it did it in 12 months, right? Digital gold is better than gold. Just like digital photos are better than physical photos, and digital videos are better than your VHS cassettes, right? It's not a complicated idea. I digitally transform something. It's 1,000,000 times smarter, 1,000,000 times faster, 1,000,000 times more ubiquitous, 1,000,000 times, lighter than the thing that it replaced.
Bitcoin's market value surpassed $2 trillion in January 2025, fueled by pro-crypto policies under Trump, which have spurred institutional adoption. BlackRock CEO Larry Fink predicts Bitcoin could hit $700,000 if major investors allocate 2 to 5% of their portfolios to it. With growing institutional interest and strong U.S. support, Bitcoin's future is looking brighter than ever. Now let's hear more from Michael Saylor.
In 2024, 10 of the top 20 ETFs launched were all based on Bitcoin, right? So everybody's cool ideas, right? It's based on Bitcoin or some derivative of Bitcoin. Those spot Bitcoin ETFs, they're compliance gateways or wrappers. If I want to buy Bitcoin, then I have to solve the compliance problem, the compatibility problem, the convenience problem. And in January of 2024, the first ETFs got approved in the US to do this. This is the list of them. In that 12 months, they siphoned up $109 billion of AUM. So it gives you a sense of just how fast they moved. They were a solution to a problem, right? But it's not just a US phenomenon. ETFs that are backing Bitcoin or are backed by Bitcoin are popping up every country in the world. And so you can see they're in Canada, they're in Sweden, they're in Germany, they're in Singapore, they're in Switzerland, they're in Australia, right? they solve a fundamental issue, right? In some cases, it solves the issue of reporting, tax compliance. It may solve the issue of capital controls, right? You know, you're seeing ETFs popping up in Hong Kong. Eventually, the Chinese will let you own Bitcoin, but they're more likely to let you own it if it's custodied in a bank in Shanghai, right? Many countries, they're not trying to keep their citizens or their companies from getting rich. They're simply trying to keep the capital from flowing out of the company or the country. So it's totally fine for a billion people to make an investment that makes them money as long as they keep it in the country in question. And so these ETFs, in many cases, they're handles or they're wrappers, but they're also just solving the problem of how do you be politically correct and how do you be harmonious with all of the regulators around the world. Wealthy families, they're always looking for how to diversify their assets. It's like, I own a bunch of real estate, or I own a diversified portfolio of stocks, or I want some other alternative assets. Well, there's 60 global billionaires that we know publicly are invested in Bitcoin. I give you a short list. But the more important point is Bitcoin is the fastest growing alternative investment for high net worth individuals in the world. And that takes us to the question of what is Bitcoin? Well, Bitcoin just requires a return to first principles. It's a new form of technology. It is economic technology. I think of it as digital energy. But, you know, if you started with this trope and you said, what did Satoshi do? Satoshi discovered a method to transfer value without a trusted intermediary. And people oftentimes repeat that. But that's the small idea. It's not the big idea. Yes, we transfer $1 billion from point A to point B without a bank. The big idea is in order to transfer value without an intermediary, you have to store the value without an intermediary. The big idea is I put the $1 billion into cyberspace forever. The big idea is we launched a payload into orbit. When you launch a payload into a ballistic trajectory, it comes back to Earth. When you launch it into orbit, it orbits forever, right? When you get to escape velocity, maybe it's never coming back. So imagine the idea that I could put $1 billion into a bank in cyberspace that would stay there untarnished, not corroding, right, without being debased. Forever. Like forever is such a powerful idea, right? It's frictionless, it's superconducting. The big idea is store value without an intermediary. It means you transcend banks. You transcend physical laws, right? This represents a digital transformation of capital from financial and physical assets to digital, pure digital. Like how much does a book weigh if it's the Encyclopedia Britannica? How much does it weigh when it's a digital Encyclopedia Britannica? One of them is 1 billion trillion times lighter than the other. It's the fundamental phase shift. And now what's that worth? Well, global wealth is divided across a bunch of assets. Here's a $900 trillion wealth chart. People own half those things for utility. They own buildings to live in or work in, and they own cars to drive, and they own companies to operate. But the other half of the assets are just held as a long-term store of capital. You bought it because you had money and you needed to put the money to work. So you have a land bank, you bought a bunch of land, you bought a bunch of commercial real estate, you bought a bunch of bonds. Half of everything is just long-term capital. So if that's what half of everything is, what's the problem? Well, the problem is when you put your money, your $450 trillion, into that long-term capital investment, you get hit with taxes, income tax, you get hit with wage controls, price controls, regulations. There's a fire in California. There's a hurricane in Florida. There's a war in Russia and Ukraine. There's a currency collapse in Egypt. There's a bank failure in Lebanon, right? These are all the things that cause you to lose money. If you're an investor and you've lived long enough, you can probably give me 30, 40, 50 ways you lost money. Most 10Ks have 30, 40 pages of risk factors of just ways you can lose money. There's a lot of ways you can lose in the world. I'm going to call it entropy. I'm going to call it chaos. I'm going to call it the passage of time. Your warehouse just gets older. It was a good warehouse, and 40 years later, it's not a good warehouse. You have to rebuild it. What's that cost? Well, that costs about $10 trillion a year. It's 3% of 450 trillion, right? It's costing us money to store, I'm going to put $1 billion in your hands, and you got to go buy up everything you want in Asia and hold it 100 years. Then play all these out, and you realize there's going to be an entropic lapse. There's going to be an inefficiency there. Well, Bitcoin is an asset without that financial risk of the currency, the stock, or the bond you're going to buy, and it doesn't have the physical risk of real estate or a property because you put it in cyberspace. It is in orbit. It is outside of the political domain, outside of the physical domain, outside of a currency domain. And that is a solution to long-term capital.
Bitcoin is revolutionizing wealth storage, offering a secure, inflation-proof alternative to traditional assets. Its adoption is growing rapidly across institutions, governments, and individuals, shaping the future of financial stability. The real question isn't if Bitcoin will play a role, but how big that role will be. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe,